President Trump's Commerce Secretary, the man in charge of overseeing America's $30 trillion economy, admitted under oath this week that he visited Jeffrey Epstein's private island in 2012. Howard Lutnick, member of Trump's cabinet, former neighbor of Epstein's, and according to newly released DOJ files, someone who maintained contact with Epstein for years after claiming he'd cut ties. Today, President Trump was asked about it, and his response? I wasn't aware of it. I actually haven't spoken to him about it. But then in the same breath, Trump added, but from what I hear, he was there with his wife and children. So which is it? He wasn't aware, or he heard about it. Tonight, we're breaking down what Lutnick admitted, why his story keeps changing, and why Trump's Commerce Secretary is facing bipartisan calls to resign. If you want coverage that doesn't look away from uncomfortable truths, that holds power accountable, subscribe to Capital Prime right now. Hit that bell, because this story is far from over. Let's begin. Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, Senate Appropriations Committee hearing. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is supposed to be testifying about broadband funding. Instead, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, asks about the Epstein files. Why did the Epstein files show you coordinating a meeting and planning a visit with Jeffrey Epstein on his private island in December of 2012? Lutnick pauses. Then he admits it. I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple, they were there as well with their children. And we had lunch on the island, that is true, for an hour. And we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife all together. December 2012, 4 years after Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor. 4 years after Epstein became a registered sex offender. And Howard Lutnick, Trump's Commerce Secretary, brought his wife, his 4 kids, their nannies, and another family to have lunch with him on his private island. Senator Van Hollen wasn't buying it. You made a very big point of saying that you sensed this was a bad person in 2005. And then, of course, in 2008, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution of a minor. And yet you went and had this trip and other interactions. Lutnick insisted I did not have any relationship with him. I barely had anything to do with that person. But the documents tell a different story. Let me take you back to October 2025. Before the Epstein files were released, before anyone knew about the island visit, Howard Lutnick went on the Podforce One with Miranda Devine podcast, and he told a very specific story about Jeffrey Epstein. He said that in 2005, he and his wife moved into a house next door to Epstein's infamous Upper East Side townhouse in New York. Epstein invited them over for coffee. My wife and I go next door. We walk 7 steps right to the next house for coffee, and he opens the doors to the living room, and there's a massage table in the middle of the room and candles all around and stuff. Lutnick said, he asked Epstein, massage table in the middle of your house, how often do you have a massage? Epstein said, every day. And then, according to Lutnick, Epstein got weirdly close and said, and the right kind of massage. Lutnick's wife was standing right there. In the 6 or 8 steps it takes to get from his house to my house, my wife and I decided that I will never be in the room with that disgusting person ever again, Lutnick said. So I was never in the room with him socially for business or even philanthropy. If that guy was there, I wasn't going because he's gross. Never in the room again. That's what he said. On the record in October 2025. And then the DOJ released 3 million pages of Epstein files in January 2026, and Lutnick's name was all over them. Emails showing he met with Epstein in 2011, emails coordinating a visit to Epstein's island in 2012, emails from Epstein's assistant saying, it was nice seeing you after the visit. Business documents showing Lutnick and Epstein co-invested in a company called Adfin in December 2012, the same month as the island visit. So which story is true? Did Lutnick cut ties in 2005? Or did he maintain contact for another 13 years? The calls for Lutnick's resignation are coming from both sides. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, who co-authored the law that forced the release of the Epstein files, told CNN that Lutnick should make life easier on the president, frankly, and just resign. Lutnick went to the island and was in business deals with Epstein long after Lutnick says he parted ways. And even after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes, Massie said. What else is Lutnick covering up with respect to his association with Epstein? Democratic Congressman Khanna, the other co-author of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, was even blunter. This is bringing down the British government. It may bring down the monarchy. It's bringing down elites. What are we doing here in the U.S. to stand up to the Epstein class? We've got a Commerce Secretary who is all over the files. Senator Chris Van Hollen, after Lutnick's testimony, told reporters the credibility is at the core of this issue because he again suggested that he had had no further contact with this guy he called disgusting. And then years later, he's on the private island with the guy he called disgusting and bringing kids and nannies. Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, pointed out the obvious. You were planning a trip to the private island with your family. That sounds like somebody you know well enough to call up and say, let's get our families together, let's visit each other. Even some Senate Republicans are expressing concern. Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, said the island visit would raise questions. But Speaker of the House Mike Johnson defended Lutnick, calling suggestions he resign absurd. He's done an extraordinary job for the country, Johnson said. Stop playing political games. So what does President Trump think about all this? Thursday, Trump was asked by reporters, were you aware that the Secretary of Commerce visited Epstein's island? Trump's answer, no, I wasn't aware of it. No, I didn't. I actually haven't spoken to him about it. But then he immediately added, but from what I hear, he was there with his wife and children. Wait, he wasn't aware of it, but he heard about it. And if he actually hasn't spoken to him about it, where did he hear those details? Trump continued, and I guess in some cases, some people were, I wasn't, I was never there. Somebody will someday say that I was never there. That last line is telling. Trump is preemptively denying ever visiting Epstein's island, as if he knows that accusation is coming. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was asked about Lutnick on Tuesday. She said, Secretary Lutnick remains a very important member of President Trump's team, and the president fully supports the secretary. But when reporters pressed her with follow-up questions about Lutnick's Epstein connections, Leavitt launched into a monologue criticizing the media for not covering administration-promoted statistics. Then she abruptly ended the briefing and walked out. 20 minutes. That's how long Tuesday's White House press briefing lasted. Because Leavitt didn't want to answer questions about Epstein. Let's talk about what the DOJ files actually show. Because Lutnick keeps saying he barely knew Epstein, that there were maybe 10 emails over 14 years, but the documents tell a different story. May 2011, emails show Lutnick and Epstein planned to have drinks at Epstein's home at 5 p.m. December 2012. Epstein's assistant emails Lutnick to coordinate the island visit. After the visit, the assistant writes, "It was nice seeing you." December 28, 2012, Lutnick and Epstein co-signed documents investing in Adfin, an advertising technology company. They're business partners. Their signatures are on neighboring pages of the contract. 2017, Epstein contributes financially to an event honoring Lutnick. 2018, documents show Lutnick and Epstein were still in communication just a year before Epstein was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges. So when Lutnick says he barely knew Epstein, when he says he met him 2 other times after 2005, when he says there were maybe 10 emails, the documents contradict all of it. Senator Van Hollen put it plainly. You led people to believe that you had cut off all contact with Jeffrey Epstein after the 2005 encounter. That just turns out not to be true, which completely undermines his credibility. And that's the issue. Not necessarily that Lutnick committed a crime. There's no evidence he participated in Epstein's abuse, but that he lied about his relationship with Epstein, that he misled Congress, that he misled the American people. Lutnick mentioned something interesting during his testimony. He said, "There's not an indication that I myself engaged in any wrongdoing with Jeffrey Epstein." And he's right, there isn't. But that's not the standard other countries are using. In the United Kingdom, the Epstein files have triggered multiple resignations. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's chief of staff resigned. Key aides to current Prime Minister Keir Starmer resigned. The UK's ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, resigned after documents showed he shared government secrets with Epstein. In Norway, Crown Princess Mette-Marit is facing questions about her fitness to someday serve as queen after her friendly relationship with Epstein came to light. These people didn't commit crimes with Epstein either, but they associated with him, they maintained relationships with a convicted sex offender, and their governments demanded accountability. Congressman Massie pointed this out. There are 3 people in Great Britain that have resigned in politics. I mean, there are consequences in other countries, but in the United States, Howard Lutnick is still Commerce Secretary. Trump says he fully supports him, and Speaker Johnson calls suggestions of resignation absurd. So why does this matter? Why should you care about a lunch on an island 12 years ago? Because it's about credibility. It's about honesty. It's about whether we can trust the people running our government. Howard Lutnick is the Commerce Secretary. He oversees a $30 trillion economy. He's responsible for trade policy, economic growth, broadband infrastructure. He's one of the most powerful people in the Trump administration. And he lied. He told the American people on a podcast that he cut ties with Epstein in 2005, that he was never in the room with him again, that Epstein was disgusting. And then documents proved he maintained contact for another 13 years, that he visited Epstein's island in 2012, that he invested in a business with Epstein, that they were in communication as late as 2018. Senator Van Hollen asked Lutnick to provide Congress with his own records relating to Epstein to ensure that the file is complete. Lutnick said, "I will surely talk about that." Hadn't thought about that. Then he added, "I have nothing to hide." If he has nothing to hide, why didn't he tell the truth from the beginning? And if Trump wasn't aware of Lutnick's Epstein connections, why didn't his vetting team catch this before nominating him for Commerce Secretary? These are questions that demand answers, because the American people deserve leaders who tell the truth. This week, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick admitted under oath that he visited Jeffrey Epstein's private island in 2012 with his family. He admitted he maintained contact with Epstein for years after claiming he'd cut ties. He admitted the documents contradict his earlier statements. President Trump says he wasn't aware of it, but also says he heard Lutnick was there with his wife and kids. The White House fully supports Lutnick. Speaker Johnson calls resignation demands absurd. Meanwhile, in other countries, officials are resigning over far less. Subscribe to Capital Prime, because we're going to keep following this story. Every document, every contradiction, every call for accountability. Let me know in the comments, do you think Lutnick should resign? Should Trump have known about this before appointing him? And why are American standards for accountability so much lower than the rest of the world's? This is Capital Prime. Good night.